That day when Grandpa returned from the dead changed everything forever. I remember the day everything changed. It was late September of 2020, just starting to cool down. One of those crisp mornings that made you think of flannel and black coffee, not sudden tragedy. My grandfather, Alec Grayson, took off on one of his usual hunting trips into the Colorado mountains, something he'd done nearly every fall since I was a kid. Only this time, he didn't come back. They searched for him for days. Dogs, helicopters, volunteers combing every inch of the forest. I kept checking my phone like I'd missed something. A message, a call, any hint that he was still alive and maybe just lost or holed up waiting out bad weather. But it never came. Eventually, the sheriff's office called it. Officially, missing and presumed dead. I remember standing in the hallway of the company headquarters the morning the announcement went out, watching the flag at half-mast flutter over the parking lot. Alec Grayson was gone. Grayson Infrastructure, that was his company. Built it from nothing. Started with eco-focused logistics and gradually turned it into a giant in clean energy construction. My grandfather was the kind of man who could walk into a room full of oil lobbyists and walk out with them donating to solar research. Ruthless when he needed to be, sure, but he had lines he wouldn't cross. Environmental sustainability wasn't a brand for him, it was a damn mission. And then there was my father, Victor Martin, Alec's son-in-law, married to my mother, though calling him a partner in anything always felt like a stretch. The man could smile at a funeral and make it look like a photo op, cold, polished, transactional. Victor had always treated people like contracts. I'd never seen him show a real human emotion unless it could be monetized. Alec hadn't even been declared dead for 48 hours when Victor moved in. He didn't cry, didn't offer any speech about legacy or grief. He walked into the boardroom with my older brother Henry at his side, slapped down some paperwork, and rebranded the entire company. Overnight, Grayson Infrastructure became Martin Global. They didn't even wait for the ink on the death certificate to dry. It wasn't just the name that changed. The whole company culture flipped like someone had switched the moral compass to profit at any cost. Out went the climate reports, the vetting committees, the ethical guidelines. In came fast contracts, questionable permits, and partnerships with companies Alec would have laughed out of the room. The green was still there, but only in the accounting books. Henry was all in. I should have seen it coming. He'd always been eager to prove himself to our father, and this was his chance. He started dressing like Victor, talking like him too. All shareholder value this, quarterly growth that. I watched him shake hands with men who used to fear our company's audits. It was like watching someone slowly lose their soul in real time. And me? I couldn't do it. I tried to sit in on one of the new strategic meetings and walked out halfway through. It felt like someone had gutted the house I grew up in and turned it into a strip mall. I told Victor the first wasn't going to be part of it, and he gave me that dead-eyed smile he reserves for people he's about to fire. You were always a little too sentimental for this business, he said. So that was that. No farewell speech, no office clean-out. Just silence. My access badge stopped working 2 days later. Funny thing is, I didn't even realize how deeply the rot had spread until I was out of it. My own mother barely spoke to me. Henry? Sent one text. Hope you find what you're looking for. That was it. I became the outsider in my own family. The black sheep. The one who wouldn't play ball. But I still carry Alec's watch. Still remember the way he used to look out over the construction sites like he was seeing something 20 years down the line. I don't know what happened up in those mountains. Maybe he got lost. Maybe something worse. But part of me, the part that refuses to stop asking questions, wonders if he knew what was coming. If he saw the shift before the rest of us did. And if he did, maybe disappearing was the only way he knew how to fight back. I'm 33 now and live alone in a 2-bedroom rental on the east side of Austin. Nothing fancy, just clean walls, working plumbing, and a desk I bought off Craigslist that doesn't wobble when I write. I work as an education consultant, mostly remote projects for underfunded districts trying to patch holes with duct tape and borrowed curriculum, which means long nights squinting at spreadsheets and policy drafts while the rest of the world pretends it cares about public schools. The job doesn't make headlines, but it keeps my conscience intact, which is more than I can say for most of my family. I haven't attended a Martin family function since the boardroom ambush that killed Grayson Infrastructure. Thanksgiving invites stopped coming after the 3rd year I didn't RSVP, and Henry blocked me on everything except email. Probably so I'd still get the quarterly press releases about Martin Global's latest environmental innovation that usually involved more concrete and less conscience. The last time I saw my father in person, he looked me in the eye across a silent dining room and called me a traitor. You think your precious values make you better than the rest of us? He asked, standing there in his tailored suit like he'd just climbed out of a villain catalog. Grandstanding doesn't pay the bills, Nick. It just makes you irrelevant. My brother Henry was more subtle, but only just. He said I was wasting my life, Called me a fool for walking away from a guaranteed legacy. Like loyalty was something that could be leveraged on a balance sheet. He used to be the kind of kid who cried when he stepped on a bug. Now he signs contracts that pave over entire ecosystems and calls it progress. Maybe he always wanted to be our dad's clone, or maybe something in him broke after Alec vanished. Either way, there's no reaching him now. But my mother, Lauren, she never stopped calling. She still sends texts late at night sometimes, just as simple thinking of you, or a blurry photo of some old family recipe scrawled in Alec's handwriting, like she's tossing messages into the ocean, hoping I'll find them before they sink. We meet for lunch a few times a year, always somewhere neutral and quiet. I watch the way her hands shake slightly when she stirs her coffee, like grief's been living in her bones ever since that day in Colorado. She never says it outright, but I can see it in her eyes. The same doubt I've carried since the moment they declared my grandfather dead. Because here's the thing. I don't think Alec Grayson just disappeared. I don't buy that he got lost, or stumbled, or was taken by some random act of nature. That man could navigate a mountain blindfolded with a compass made of string and spit. He didn't vanish. He was erased. And every time I think about it, every time I look at the sanitized empire my father built on the ashes of Alec's life's work, I wonder how far they were willing to go to silence the last man in that company who still believed in something. I don't have proof, just whispers and timelines and a gut instinct that won't shut up. But I can't let it go. I won't. Not while the man who raised me, the man who taught me how to build a fire, how to stand up straight when I was scared, how to tell the truth even when it hurt, is still a question mark in a police report and a framed photo in a lobby that bears someone else's name. So yeah, I live small. I keep my head down. I spend my time helping kids who've never even heard of Grayson Infrastructure. But I never stopped being Alec's grandson. And I never will. People talk about legacy like it's a trophy you pass down, but I grew up watching mine get poisoned 1 inch at a time by the man Alec Grayson trusted most. My grandfather built Grayson Infrastructure with nothing but a degree, 2 hands, and a moral code etched deeper than concrete. He was an engineer by trade, but a believer by nature. Believed that clean energy wasn't a trend, that water shouldn't be a luxury, that business could serve people instead of strip them bare. That belief paid for solar farms in low-income communities, water purification systems in drought-choked towns, rebuilt clinics in flood zones halfway across the world. He didn't do it for headlines. He did it because he believed the world could be better and that someone had to prove it. And then there was Victor Martin, born in Guatemala, landed in Houston with nothing but a student visa and a toolbox. Alec met him at a charity build in the early 90s, liked his work ethic, saw something in him, gave him a shot at an internship, then a junior position, then full sponsorship for his citizenship. Before long, he was being invited to family dinners, given a seat at the table, literally and otherwise. My mother fell in love with him before the ink dried on his promotion. They were married the next year. Alec welcomed him into the family like a second son, even called him kid, in front of board members, always with that half smile that said he still believed people could be better if you gave them the chance. But time has a way of stripping off the polish, and underneath all of Victor's quiet charm and yes sir discipline was something hungrier, colder. At first, no one noticed. He was just a little too eager to cut costs, too willing to reassess charity budgets, too quick to suggest outsourcing community projects to private contractors with vague ethics and cleaner spreadsheets. Alec pushed back, of course, always in private, always with grace. I remember one night, overhearing them talk through the office wall, Alec saying, "We don't build on the backs of the people we're supposed to help," and Victor responding, "Then you'll never grow past your own shadow." I didn't understand what that meant back then. Now I can't unhear it. Victor wasn't loud about it. He planned slow, strategic, the kind of man who plays chess without moving until everyone forgets he's even in the game. He built connections, cultivated alliances in silence, quietly aligning with investors who didn't care about community impact statements or emissions data. He learned how to wait, how to smile, how to be indispensable without looking ambitious. By the time Alec started asking real questions, Victor already had enough hands in the right pockets to make himself bulletproof. And then Alec disappeared. I don't say that lightly. I mean it in the way you say a monument vanished from the skyline. Like something you thought would never move was suddenly gone, and in its place was a cold vacancy shaped like betrayal. The day he went missing, there were 3 names on the flight log. Only 2 came back. Victor didn't look shaken, not even a little. Wore black like it was just another press obligation. Held my mother's hand at the memorial like he wasn't the one who'd gutted the man who gave him everything. But I see it now. I see it in the boardroom plaques, in the mission statements rewritten in corporate gibberish, in the way Henry parades around Martin Global like it's some birthright carved from stone. None of them talk about Alec anymore, not really. Just generic platitudes about founding principles that they've rewritten to fit a strategy deck. They pretend it was all part of some natural evolution, like the soul of the company just outgrew its conscience. But I remember the way Alec used to say integrity is a structure, and if you cut corners, the whole thing collapses. Victor didn't just cut corners. He bulldozed the foundation and built himself a palace on the rubble. And we let him in. We fed him, gave him a name, gave him a family. Now he wears it like a mask. 5 years. That's how long it's been since Alec Grayson vanished into the Colorado mountains, and still, not a single part of me believes he's dead. I've read the reports so many times I could recite them in my sleep. The weather conditions, the search party logs, the official conclusion stamped with that sterile phrase, presumed deceased. I've seen the photos from the supposed search perimeter, the aerial shots, the so-called final GPS coordinates from his last known location. None of it makes sense. None of it fits. Alec didn't just go missing. He was removed, wiped clean, like a line deleted from a blueprint. It started slowly, at night mostly, when I couldn't sleep. I'd pull out the files I'd saved, copies of incident logs, internal memos Alec had signed, early board communications before the rebranding, and I'd start connecting dots, sketching timelines, tracing names. It wasn't just about grief anymore. It was about rot. The deeper I dug into what Martin Global had become, the more rancid the foundation smelled. I started calling former employees, the ones who didn't make the transition after Victor took over, the ones quietly let go or shoved out with NDAs and severance packages that had more clauses than actual checks. Most wouldn't talk. Some hung up before I even finished my name. But a few did. One of the early architects, a guy named Dennis who'd worked on the Arizona solar farm in 2018, told me they'd been forced to fudge output numbers for a subsidy program. That plant's not even running at half of what we claimed, he said, voice low, like he thought someone might be listening. Another contact, a junior chemist from the Nebraska site, told me the new management scrapped Alec's eco-testing protocol. There's toxic runoff seeping into a creek near a school. I tried to report it, but legal shut it down. And then there was the procurement officer who left without even collecting his pension. Victor's got city inspectors on payroll, he said. The clean certifications are jokes. I documented everything. Names, dates, allegations. And every time I found something new, it made the official narrative about Alec's disappearance look even more like a cover story slapped together by people who had a lot to gain from him vanishing. The tipping point came in the most unexpected way. I was visiting my mom one afternoon. Nothing dramatic, just one of our quiet lunches at the Old Garden Cafe where the waitstaff still knew our names. She looked tired. Her hands trembled when she poured her tea. We hadn't talked about Alec in months. I thought she was trying to let go, but halfway through a bowl of soup, she set her spoon down and said, I need you to find out what really happened to your grandfather. No build-up, no warning, just those words, dropped like bricks in the middle of our quiet table. I didn't know what to say. I think I just stared at her. She nodded slowly, like she already knew I'd been doing exactly that in secret. I never believed the story they told us, she said, her voice cracking just enough to remind me how much she'd kept buried. Not for a second. Alec wouldn't have disappeared without a reason. And the people who claimed to love him most, they had every reason to want him gone. She didn't name Victor. She didn't have to. That was the moment it shifted from suspicion to purpose. She asked me to find the truth, and not for closure, not for revenge, but because deep down, she was still hoping he might come back. Or at the very least, that his memory wouldn't rot in the hands of the people who betrayed it. So that's where I am now, halfway between a past no one wants to remember and a future that feels like walking through a minefield. All I know is this. Alec didn't just vanish. Something darker happened out there. Something cold, calculated, and buried deep beneath the smiling press releases and sanitized headlines. And if no one else is going to dig it up, I will. Because someone has to. Because she asked me to. Because I still hear his voice in my head, saying, do what's right, even when it's the harder thing. It was pouring that night, the kind of cold, relentless rain that turned gutters into rivers and soaked through jackets in seconds. I was in the middle of sorting files, another dead-end lead from a former auditor in Denver, when I heard the knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps against the door. Not urgent, not hesitant. Just steady, like the person behind it wasn't in a hurry because he already knew what came next. I stood up, heart already thudding with the kind of dread that doesn't come from fear, but from instinct, like my bones knew something before my mind could catch up. When I opened the door, I froze. He was older, thinner. His beard was thick and streaked with white, and his coat hung from him like it didn't belong to his body. But his eyes, those eyes were the same. Steel gray, sharp as broken glass, and impossible to mistake. I didn't say his name. I couldn't. My throat locked up, and my brain kept repeating one phrase over and over like a malfunctioning machine. It's him. It's him. It's really him. He stepped inside without asking. Just nodded once, like we were picking up a conversation from 5 years ago that had been paused mid-sentence. His boots left wet prints on the hardwood, and I watched as he took off the coat, shook the water from his shoulders, and looked around like he was seeing civilization for the first time in a decade. Then he sat down at my kitchen table like he'd done it 100 times before, folded his hands, and finally spoke. They tried to kill me, Nick. It came out flat. No drama. No edge. Just the kind of truth that didn't need emphasis because it had already been lived. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just listened as my grandfather, Alec Grayson, the man they buried in speeches and tributes and boardroom plaques, told me how my father and my brother lured him out to the mountains under the guise of a family hunt, walked him to the edge of a ridge, and shoved him off. I hit the rocks halfway down, he said, his voice raw but steady. Thought I was done. Woke up 3 days later in a shepherd's cabin. Man didn't speak a word of English, but he kept me alive. Fed me. Treated the wounds. Hid me when the helicopters passed overhead. He paused then, staring into the dark beyond the rain-streaked window like he could still see the ridge where his life ended and something colder began. I couldn't come back. Not then. No one would have believed me. And if they did, it wouldn't have mattered. Victor had already taken everything. He reached into the inside of his coat and pulled out a worn leather pouch, the kind he used to keep maps in when I was a kid. He laid it on the table with quiet precision and unzipped it. Inside were stacks of printed emails, photocopied statements, a flash drive, even a tiny audio recorder that looked like something from a spy movie. 5 years of waiting, watching, collecting. It's all here. I looked down at the files, my hands still shaking, and then back at him. He hadn't blinked once. The man who had built a clean empire, who had taught me that honor wasn't optional, had spent half a decade living like a ghost, all because he trusted the wrong people with his name. They buried me so they could build a monument to themselves, he said. But I'm still breathing, and it's time they remembered who I am. And in that moment, with the rain pounding the windows and the past sitting soaked at my kitchen table, I realized something that changed everything. Alec Grayson didn't come back from the dead for closure. He came back for war. The next morning, everything changed. We didn't talk about grief or shock. We got to work. Alec was relentless, not in the way of some old man clinging to pride, but with the quiet, surgical precision of someone who'd waited too long to be sentimental. He opened that leather pouch like it was a scalpel set. Every page, every file, every login credential, organized, time-stamped, sourced. Decades of accounting buried beneath shell companies, backdated contracts with environmental regulators, encrypted emails confirming backdoor payments to city officials. All of it real. All of it tied to Victor and Henry by name. We met in secret with a litigation firm Alec had vetted long ago. Old school, but vicious, the kind that didn't blink when we laid everything on the table. Within 2 weeks, we had 3 attorneys working full-time on the case, cross-referencing financial statements with whistleblower testimonies Alec had gathered over the years. One of them, a former compliance officer from the Lima branch, confirmed that the water filtration project they'd announced with confetti and speeches never broke ground. The funds were rerouted, buried under marketing fluff and fake expense reports. It was theft dressed as innovation. I handled the research end, reaching out to the contacts I'd built over years of digging alone. Alec dealt with the legal strategy and timing. His brain hadn't dulled. If anything, 5 years off the grid had only sharpened his edges. Every meeting, every move, timed, measured, and intentional. Like he was laying foundation for a structure no one could knock down this time. We told my mother 3 weeks into the plan. I didn't want to at first. Part of me thought the shock would break her again. But Alec insisted. Said he wouldn't do this without her knowing. We met at the park, the one she still visited out of habit, like walking the old paths might bring him back. When he stepped out from behind the row of pines, she froze. I watched the color drain from her face, then rush back in like the tide. She didn't scream. She didn't speak. Just walked to him and touched his face like she needed proof her mind wasn't playing a trick. She cried, not from fear or confusion, but like someone who'd been holding their breath for 5 years and could finally exhale. You came back, she whispered. He just nodded and said, I never left. After that, something inside her lit up again. She joined the planning, read every document we handed her, even flagged inconsistencies in some of the press releases from year 2 of Martin Global. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving. She was building something again, something worth protecting. The final piece was the event. Martin Global's 5th anniversary celebration was scheduled for a Friday night at the downtown Civic Center. Black ties, catered speeches, rented applause. Victor had planned it to be a coronation. Henry was flying in from Dubai. Board members. Investors, press, everyone that mattered to them would be there, smug in their tuxedos, sipping cocktails over the ashes of the company they'd hijacked. It would be the perfect place to tell the truth. Alex spent hours writing the speech, crossing out lines and rewriting them until it was exactly right. He wanted no drama, no vengeance, just the truth delivered clean and direct. He practiced it once with me in the kitchen, his voice low, measured, clear. Not the voice of a ghost returned to haunt them. The voice of a man reclaiming what they thought was buried. That same week, he rewrote his will. He didn't tell me at first, just left the envelope on my desk one morning before heading to a strategy meeting with the legal team. Inside, it was all laid out in that tight, no-nonsense script I remembered from his old project blueprints. Effective immediately, all shares and controlling interest in Grayson Infrastructure, still listed as an active corporate entity under its original articles, thanks to Alex's quiet planning, would be transferred to me. The clean version of the company. The real version. Everything else, including personal assets and intellectual property, would follow. He didn't leave a note. He didn't need to. I already knew what he was saying. I had stayed. I hadn't sold the name, hadn't worn the suit, hadn't looked the other way. When everyone else bought into the illusion, I'd chosen the quiet path. And now he was handing me back the foundation, not out of reward, but because someone had to keep it standing, and someone had to speak the truth. The ballroom smelled like expensive perfume and corporate arrogance, the kind of place where people laughed too loudly at things they didn't find funny and clapped because it was expected. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, casting a glossy warmth over the sea of suits and dresses, all gathered to toast the 5th anniversary of a company built on a corpse. Victor stood near the stage in a black tux, nodding to donors and old friends like a king about to give his final blessing. Henry hovered nearby, drink in hand, already grinning like he'd won something. I stepped through the double doors with Alec at my side. At first, no one noticed. Then a few heads turned. A few glasses froze midair. Conversations stopped in fragments, little bursts of what the end is that, as the reality started to ripple through the room. Then the silence dropped like a hammer. Victor saw us. His face didn't move, but his hand gripped the edge of the podium so tightly I thought he might snap it off. Henry went pale, lips slightly parted like he couldn't decide if he was seeing a ghost or a problem he hadn't prepared for. Alec didn't flinch. He walked straight down the center aisle like the floor had been laid just for him, every step slow, calm, undeniable. The room parted around us, people backing away as if guilt could rub off on contact. A few board members turned and left, pretending they had urgent calls. A journalist in the corner raised a phone. The air was heavy with the kind of tension you only feel when something sacred is about to collapse. He stepped up to the mic before Victor could speak. No fireworks. No drama. Just a steady voice, familiar and clear. My name is Alec Grayson. I was declared dead 5 years ago. That was a lie. He let the silence breathe before continuing. I was pushed off a cliff by my own family during what was supposed to be a hunting trip. I survived because a stranger found me and saved my life. For 5 years, I've lived in hiding, gathering proof of what Martin Global really is. Tonight, I am no longer silent. He nodded to the AV tech in the corner, a man we'd paid well to ignore every security protocol Martin Global had tried to enforce. The first audio recording played over the speakers, Victor's voice, clipped and cold, discussing redirecting environmental cleanup funds with someone from city zoning. Then Henry's voice, laughing about falsified emissions data while closing a deal over whiskey. Then a series of emails projected across the giant LED screen, confirming shell corporations, illegal overseas transfers, and the suppression of whistleblower reports. The room turned into a vacuum. Faces drained. Someone dropped a glass. Alec didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He laid out everything. The fraud, the toxic leaks, the money laundering, the bribes, the silencing of regulators, the attempted murder. He named names, dates, locations, played clips, showed documents. He didn't look at Victor once until the end. You took my name, he said, turning toward the man who used to be his son-in-law. You built this empire on deceit and tried to bury the one person who stood in your way. But you forgot one thing. I built the foundation. And I never forgot how to rebuild. The moment he stepped back from the mic, the ballroom doors opened again. Only this time, it wasn't us. It was the police. 2 officers walked in, followed by a plainclothes federal investigator. They moved quickly, efficiently, straight to the front of the room. Victor didn't move. Henry started to speak, but his voice cracked. They were both placed in cuffs without resistance, though Victor tried to straighten his jacket like it mattered. Flashbulbs exploded from every direction. Phones filmed every second. Half the room was still frozen. The other half was already on the phone with lawyers. Alex stood still as they were let out, his hands folded in front of him like he was back at a board meeting, waiting for someone to ask about quarterly projections. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The moment had passed through us like a wave. It wasn't revenge. It was revelation. And it was over. The headlines hit like a hurricane. Grayson returns from the dead, exposes family in corporate coup. Martin Global unravels. Billions in fraud. Eco crimes uncovered. Victor Martin gets 20 years. Henry Martin sentenced to 15. Grayson family scandal rocks industry. Every screen, every paper, every damn app was plastered with my face and Alex, side by side. One man pulled back from the grave, the other suddenly holding the steering wheel of a company he never wanted to inherit this way. I couldn't go to the store without someone pointing. I couldn't open my email without 5 new interview requests waiting. And I couldn't close my eyes without hearing the click of cameras or the voice of a network anchor explaining who I was like I didn't already know. The legal storm came first. Federal investigators launched full-scale audits within days. Whistleblowers we hadn't even known about started coming out of the woodwork, armed with encrypted backups, burner phones, screenshots of messages they were too afraid to reveal until now. The damage was worse than even Alec expected. Hundreds of millions siphoned through shell entities. Rigged environmental impact studies. Dozens of communities exposed to pollutants that were never disclosed. Projects that were pitched as humanitarian efforts, in Bolivia, Sudan, even here in the States, turned out to be fronts for asset grabs and tax loopholes. The fallout was nuclear. Martin Global's assets were frozen overnight. 32 senior staff were removed, most under investigation, some already indicted. We shut down every pipeline deal and litigation. Canceled 3 manufacturing operations before sunrise. Contractors were scrambling. Investors were calling us frauds. But the people, the ones Victor never cared about, they were watching too. And they finally saw the truth. I took over the company the morning after the arraignment. I didn't sit in Alex's old office. I tore the damn thing down and built a war room in its place, stripped the walls bare, put up boards, markers, files. I brought in compliance teams, fired every executive tied to falsified reports, rehired 3 staffers who'd been pushed out for asking too many questions, and gave them the authority to audit everything. We rewrote the charter from the ground up. We changed the name back. Grayson Infrastructure was back on paper, but it was nowhere near clean. Every day brought another fire, another lawsuit, another headline. There was no sleep. There was no privacy. The media followed me from boardrooms to gas stations. People either saw me as a savior or a symptom. Some still said I was just trying to save face for the family. That maybe I'd been in on it all along. Didn't matter what I said. The machine didn't care. It just kept chewing. But I didn't stop. Because somewhere under all that damage was the company Alec built. The real one. The one that meant something. And if it was still breathing, even just barely, then I owed it to him to keep it alive. Not for headlines. Not for legacy. Just because it was right. Because doing the right thing, even when it wrecks your life, is the only thing that ever mattered. And because I still heard his voice some nights, low and steady like always. Rebuild it, Nick. Do it right this time. The day the new signage went up, I stood alone in the parking lot long before sunrise, just watching the letters go up one by one. No photographers. No champagne ribbon cutting. Just a quiet crew, some cold wind, and the sound of metal bolts tightening into steel. Grayson Infrastructure. No Martin. No Global. Just what it was always meant to be. I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like something was finally back where it belonged. The first major decision I made after the dust started to settle wasn't about contracts or expansion. It was about my mother. I created the Lauren Foundation because she deserved more than surviving in silence. I watched her lose 20 years of her life to a man who turned his charm into a cage and weaponized loyalty until it bled. She never raised her voice. She never left bruises on paper. But what she endured was no less real. The foundation funds shelters, offers legal aid to women navigating toxic marriages, covers relocation costs when they need to disappear for safety. We partnered with psychologists, built partnerships with universities, started workshops for survivors who never got to finish school because they were too busy surviving. She cried the day I showed her the charter. Then she asked me when she could start helping. The company shifted almost overnight. We shut down every remaining fossil project and poured the reserves into hydroelectric plants in low-income counties, retrofitted 2 abandoned sites in West Virginia, and launched our first biogas complex near a farming district in Nebraska. No flash, no media blitz. Just clean power for people who needed it and never thought they'd get it. The old guard started showing up again. Not the corporate parasites that Victor had surrounded himself with, but Alec's people. The ones who remembered what this place used to feel like when ethics weren't just bullet points in a presentation. I didn't have to convince them. They came back on their own. Some were already retired. Some had found other work. All of them still had his number saved in their phones, even though it hadn't rung in years. We started offering scholarships to engineering students from underfunded districts, partnered with public high schools, built a mentorship pipeline that didn't care if your GPA was perfect or if your last name came with prestige. We wanted thinkers, builders, kids who looked at broken things and wanted to understand how to fix them. The same way Alec used to look at the world. I still didn't have a personal life. I couldn't go anywhere without being recognized. I ate dinner at my desk more often than I didn't. Sleep came in fragments. But for the first time since I walked away from the boardroom years ago, I wasn't just reacting to disaster. I was creating again. Not for redemption, not to be seen, just to give back what had been stolen. We weren't just rebuilding a company. We were restoring an idea, one blueprint at a time.